How does chemotherapy affect ovarian reserve, and which types of immature eggs or cells or follicles are truly at risk? So this paper looked at the reserve, which is a pool of resting follicles that a woman has available for future fertility. Traditionally, scientists have focused on primordial follicles, the earliest and the most dormant egg cells, that is the smallest, as a main part of ovarian reserve. However, there seems to be a debate about whether transitional follicles, slightly more developed, are also resting, or are they, and if they're already starting to grow. The motivation of this research comes from the need to protect women's fertility after cancer treatments, especially chemotherapy, which can damage the ovarian reserve. Previous studies in mice have suggested that transitional follicles, which are slightly bigger and already growing, may be protected. But this is not true for humans. The authors argue that in humans and other large mammals like cows, transitional follicles are much more common, and they're truly growing, the ovary will be depleted faster, and that is in real life. Now, by comparing primordial and transitional follicles, they found that both types responded similarly to chemotherapy, with a 2 to 3 fold increase in markers for growth activation. Importantly, there was no difference in marker between two types of follicles, whether treated or not. This strongly suggests that both the primordial and the transitional follicles are a part of the resting pool in humans. Based on the research findings, chemotherapy does not spare resting follicles. Both primordial and transitional follicles, previously found to be in different stages, are equally vulnerable to destruction by chemotherapy. Now, why are these findings important? Because it challenges the idea, which is based on mouse studies, that transitional follicles are already growing and are not affected. In human, in fact, both types of follicles, resting and those which are not resting, are at risk with chemotherapy. And if you have to preserve fertility, you need to be much more careful about how you preserve it. The study has limitations because it was done in the laboratory and only one chemotherapy drug was tested. However, the results are clear and consistent with what we see in real life. Human ovaries are not depleted as quickly as mouse ovaries, and they would be if transitional follicles were affected. That is something which we have learned, that with chemotherapy, both types of follicles, the growing ones as well as the non growing and the small ones, are affected.